One.
Hey, welcome to the best podcast in the universe. My name's Anthony Rogers. We have Bruce here with us, and my girlfriend Gabrielle. And then on the line we have best-selling author Jeff Bowles, who sold 300,000 copies of a book that's in my hand that you can't see because we're not doing a video for this one. So, how are you doing, Jeff?
Hello there. Nice to be here.
You sold 300,000 copies of this book already?
Yeah, the funny thing is, when I wrote the first draft in 4 days after I experimented on myself with very high doses of vitamin D3, and then I uploaded it to Amazon. I had like a goofy cover that really looks crazy with a big long title, and then didn't sell much for 6 months. But then I changed the title from Against Doctor's Orders to the title you see now, which I still can't remember.
Vitamin D3 Miracle Series, the huge secret Big Pharma does not want you to know. The miraculous results of extremely high doses of the sunshine hormone, vitamin D3, by experiment with huge doses of D3 from 25,000 to 50,000 to 100,000 IU a day over a 1 year period by Jeff T. Bowles.
Yeah, that's quite a title.
That is.
Well,
Why is it so short? What's it short for?
Well, no, I figured it. I'm self-publishing. I've got no marketing, so it's an Amazon book. So I figured the only way I could hook people in is to jam as much as I could on the cover. So then that did the trick. All of a sudden, it started selling like 40 copies a day, 50 copies a day. It was an ebook, and then I found out you can actually upload the same Word file to a Create Space that's owned by Amazon, and then they can print out paperbacks, and they have no inventory. So when someone buys one paperback, they'll print one book and mail it to them.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So and then
how much money have you made off 300,000 book sales?
Well, I would say probably I've only been making about maybe $1 to $2 a book, maybe $2 a book. So I guess I had to share it with a few people. Not much. Just one guy that I made a bad deal by saying, "Well, I'll give you 50% of the profit on the paperbacks." I thought no one would buy a paperback for $9.99, and I was wrong. So I've been giving this guy in India like all these checks for just he probably did like 5 hours work, but I'm a man of my word, so.
Can I have the other half?
Huh?
Can I have the other half?
Oh, well, maybe we'll work something out.
I'm just fucking around, man. No, but congratulations on the success. But this is a really serious thing outside of like being a really successful book. Basically, this. What are some of the claims of the book and testimonials backing it? Like, what are some of the things that high doses of D3 have done for you or like people you know of?
Oh well. By the way, it's also been translated now into 10 different languages. The French is the latest one, but it's in Japanese, German, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, some kind of weird like Montenegrin language or something. I forgot what it was.
Can I buy 5 of them right now?
What language?
I'll take 2 Dutch and 3 German.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool. Do I have to pay? What currency do I have to use?
I think you can buy them with dollars off of Amazon.
Cool. I'm gonna do that right now. I'm gonna buy 5 books in different languages.
Oh, Polish too. And that guy's never paid me. He ripped me off. But so then so you're asking about how it all got started.
You're getting to my question now. I see. You decided to go with the question.
Oh, all right. Decided to get back to the question. So. But yeah, it all started maybe 15 years ago. I read this magazine called Life Extension Magazine. I got interesting little blurbs, and this one little article said if people with like arthritic pains generally are vitamin D3 deficient. And so I said, oh, that sounds good. So I started I had bad shoulders after I hurt them playing paintball. And they just kept clicking and popping, and I didn't know what to do about it.
That's like the richest injury I've ever heard. I think I popped it out while I was paintballing.
No, because I was like, you got to run and capture the flag, and I like was crawling around on the ground and jumping and like landing on my arms on the ground, and all of a sudden, the next day I could barely lift my shoulders, and they were cracking and popping after that.
It was like Columbine, but with paintballs.
Yeah. Well, my girlfriend was there, so I had to try extra hard to impress her. So
good.
But I did capture the flag, by the way. So I had that problem for a while, and I read that little blurb. So I said, oh, well, what's the normal daily allowance you're supposed to take for vitamin D3? And I said, I'll take 400 to 800 international units. And I said, you know what, I'm going to take 4,000, see what, 10 times the dose, and see what it does. And, within a week or two, the clicking went away and the pains went away. And I used to get a weekly massage. My masseuse would never touch my shoulders. She's like, oh, because, they're like crunchy almost. And she said, oh, my God, they're completely healed. And then so I stayed. I thought that was a dangerous dose, 10 times the daily recommendation at the time. And so I kept taking about 4,000 units a day over a 10-year period. And it didn't really do much else for me, except I noticed during those 10 years, I never got a single cold. And I used to get a cold maybe twice a year, like most people. And then...
So you've cured the cold, do you think?
Excuse me?
So this is cured the common cold?
Yeah, it prevents you from getting sick, or it actually prevents almost every type of cancer, and it also prevents infections and everything else. But at the time, I had I used to run around barefoot in the gym, at the showers after workouts. And when I was younger, it was no problem. But like in my 20s, I got that yellow toenail fungus. It's disgusting that gets under your nails and you really can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
And then, so the 4,000 units a day, it didn't help that. I had some other issues, like a little subcutaneous cyst on my face. It's just like a little ball of fluid, like skin oil that it's like a pimple that never pops. And I had that. I'd had that for like 20 years. The 4,000 units a day didn't do anything for that. I had a bunch of issues that hip clicked from too much sports, like kicking. Sometimes you get a bone spur on your hip, and then it's also called dancer's hip, where you spread your legs and it clicks. It was eventually getting painful. But so I was on that 4,000 units a day for 10 years. Then finally convinced my dad, a Stanford MD, who doesn't believe in vitamins at all, but I finally got him to take 2,000 units a day, which would be 5 times the daily dose that was not considered safe by doctors. And he went and got his blood tested for D3 finally. And he was still below the minimum amount, the lowest level on the reference range was 30 nanograms per milliliter. He was like 28, and he was taking 5 times the normal dose. And I thought that was the turning point where I thought, oh, maybe we have some kind of weird genes that need higher levels of D3. So at that point, I started taking 25,000 units a day just as an experiment to see what would happen. And oh God, within a month or so, all of a sudden my shoulders just started hurting like hell. The hip click started hurting. But at the same time, I started reading every abstract in PubMed, the PubMed database for scientists and doctors. Every abstract that mentioned the word vitamin D, and there was 52,000 of them. And one abstract I read, that's just a summary of science experiment or something. Or studies with humans. And one abstract I read referred to vitamin D3 being known as the bone and joint remodeling hormone. In fact, it's not a vitamin at all. It's a hormone. It was misnamed because they had discovered vitamins A, B, and C beforehand. And then you could get vitamin D from cod liver oil. So they thought it was something you had to ingest. But they didn't realize you can also make vitamin D.
Bam. Welcome back to the best podcast in the fucking universe. So continue, Jeff. Sorry, we had to do a break for sponsors, but that and whatever the fuck that was. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you, Jeff.
Oh, all right. Well, thanks for the break. And
you're welcome.
Yeah, I was telling you about what 25,000 units a day. When I was taking it, after about a month or so, any old injuries I ever had started to hurt. Like my hip click and my shoulders felt like someone hit them with a sledgehammer. And but I had read that it's the bone and joint remodeling hormone, so I went with it. I just said I'm just going to see this thing through. And so I started taking ibuprofen. If the pain got too bad, I would stop the D3 for a week or so, let my levels get down. But I was determined to plow on through. And so by about month 2 of taking 25,000 units a day, it was unbelievable to me. It's my hip click of like 25 years. That's something that the doctors, they might do surgery for you, but the outcome is uncertain. It's not a very successful surgery. That hip click just disappeared completely. And I'd had it like 25 years. So apparently the D3 was dissolving some kind of spur on my hip bone. My shoulders finally, they quit hurting and finally all of a sudden felt great. And I could go back to working out like crazy. And then I started noticing some other things. Like my energy levels went sky high through the roof for a while, and I just wanted to get things done. And then after about 9 months, that subcutaneous cyst on my face. I was lying in bed when and this was after I bumped it up to 50,000 to 75,000 a day. And about month 9, I'm just sitting there on my bed, and also I felt this liquid just oozing down my face. The thing popped on its own, that cyst that I'd had for like 25 years. What else? I had a bone spur on my elbow from doing too much Thai boxing, and they tell you they want you to toughen up your elbows, and like an idiot, you like start smashing it into walls and stuff. So they don't tell you you're going to get a bone spur. It sticks out and it looks like Popeye the Sailor Man. After 9 months, I looked in the mirror and that damn thing was gone. I couldn't believe it. And at about the 9-month mark, those yellow toenails, which I had tried many different ways to get rid of, including the poisonous medicine they prescribe that can destroy your liver if you're unlucky. I tried that for a few days, and also my tendons started to hurt, so I gave up on that. I tried all the different home remedies. Nothing really worked. And after about 9 months on high-dose D3, those yellow toenails were growing out clear as a bell, just like a little baby's. Because it's a fungus that gets in there, and your body just can't get to it. But apparently what was going on was the D3 is like it tunes up your immune system, and your immune system is actually linked to your body repair system, because your immune system like attacks bacteria or bad actors, cancer, viruses, but it also attacks damaged tissue as part of your body repair process. So your immune system and your remodeling system are closely linked. So all right, so I'm getting all these amazing, to me, they're absolutely amazing effects, because these are things that I've gone to doctors for years, could never get any relief. And I had a ganglion cyst on my wrist, and that looked like a size of half a golf ball, and it would flare up every once in a while and get painful. And what that is basically like a weak spot on the sheath around one of your tendons. It gets a weak spot, kind of like on an inner tube that's weak. It bulges out, and then it fills with fluid. And they call those Bible bumps, because in the old days they would smash it with a Bible, and the bump would go away for a while, but it would often come back. And so I've been dealing with that for 5 years, and went to a doctor who wanted to cut it out to 4,000. I said, well, now I got the diagnosis. I'll look it up on the internet. And I read about Bible bumps. I would smash it with a rubber car dent hammer every once in a while, but it kept coming back. But I mean, that would flatten it out for a week or two. But once I was on the D3, that ganglion cyst just kept shrinking and shrinking down, and now it's just the only scar I have left is like a little hard, almost like a pea under my skin, and it's never come back, or I've never had any more dealings with that. So I started thinking, like, after reading all these abstracts, all 52,000 of them, while I was doing this experiment on myself, I started thinking about why, from an evolutionary perspective, would evolution want you to be sick if you weren't out in the sun, like if it was wintertime? So, because your D3 levels go down in the winter because there's much less sun.
Yeah, you're not outside at all. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that's how you make most of your D3, at least in the old days. And so I'm thinking, why would evolution do that? And so I started thinking, I said, you know what? It makes you depressed. People that are obese are usually very low in D3. So a low D3 level makes you crave carbohydrates. And it,
like you're hibernating, yeah.
Yeah, and then so, like in bears in the woods, their D3 levels drop 70% right in the fall, and it boosts their appetite, where the female bears will gain like 70% extra weight than they had in the summer, and that's to get them through hibernation. And I thought, you know what, maybe there was some kind of hibernation response in humans that's still locked up in our DNA, and it gets activated when our vitamin D3 levels are low, because basically evolution knows it's wintertime, and it's probably there's probably food shortages, and you have a high likelihood of starving to death. So basically evolution wants to keep you housebound during the winter, not to use much energy. Don't go outside. If you burn all your energy, you're going to starve to death most likely. So it gets you to overeat before the winter comes. And then when winter's around, it makes you depressed, where you don't want to stay in the house. Where you don't want to leave the house. It can give you arthritis, so you don't feel like leaving the house. And various ailments that just make you want to stay in and wait out this famine. So I came up with the human hibernation syndrome, and basically it suggests that humans these days, since the 1980s, the doctors have been telling us to stay out of the sun and use sunscreen, and so basically we've caused an epidemic basically around the world of what I call the human hibernation syndrome, where you basically get these ailments that never completely heal, chronic ailments. And you get the common cold. You don't get sick when you're got high levels of D3. I hear that from everybody now, that everyone that takes D3 never gets a cold anymore. So the common cold is relatively harmless, and that would keep you in the house for a couple weeks. So I think evolution created kind of a patchwork, kind of very inefficient, but it's a form of hibernation. And then since the 80s, the whole world, or at least any people north of or south of the equator, we've all been using sunscreen, and we've had all these epidemics now of almost every disease. From obesity to autism to asthma to lots of cancers have gone up, hundreds and thousands of percent since the 1980s. And I traced it all back to a worldwide vitamin D3 deficiency, or the human hibernation syndrome. It's afflicting many of us. And then the other thing is, and then I was wondering about diabetes, because people with diabetes tend to have high blood pressure. That's extra sugar in your blood, diabetes. and they tend to have high blood pressure, and they tend to be overweight. And I said, maybe.
Welcome back again. Normally we don't go this long, but I feel like Jeff has a good story, so like we're gonna keep this going a little bit. So where were you saying before the break, Jeff?
Well, I had just gone over the human hibernation syndrome seeming to cause all these epidemics that we're experiencing today since the 1980s. Almost every disease you can think of has been skyrocketing, and they don't really they haven't had a good theory for why it's happening. But I actually would, if you go to Google and you type in any disease and then you type the word latitude and then you click on images, you'll see almost always see the same chart or graph. It shows the equator, or the latitude is along the horizontal axis, and a 0 is like way out in the middle, and then you got like -90 up to +90. So 0 is the latitude of the equator, and then as you move to the left or right, you're getting further and further away from the equator, and that's where the sun's going to be weaker. And then on the vertical axis, that's the incidence of the particular disease you're looking at. And almost in every case I've seen, I've looked at almost all the diseases, the further you get away from the equator, either north or south, the higher and higher the incidence of any particular disease you're going to find. And the one thing that just screams out to me is that they're all vitamin D3 deficiency related. So, but what we were talking about was the human hibernation syndrome. And then I came up, there's one disease that didn't really fit. It was diabetes. And that's where you have too much sugar in your blood. And type 2 is when you get it when you're an adult. Type 1 is you get it as a child, and your insulin-making cells are destroyed. But in either case of diabetes, I noticed they also follow that chart pattern of increasing prevalence the further away you get from the equator. But it didn't seem. And then what I noticed about people with diabetes is they typically have high blood pressure and metabolic syndrome, which also means that they have excess weight, and they tend to crave salt also, because they always used to say salt causes high blood pressure, but I have a feeling that that's not true. And then there have been studies that come out that say salt for normal people doesn't do anything for blood pressure. And I'm coming to the conclusion that people with the metabolic syndrome or diabetes tend to crave salt, and the salt's not and the high blood pressure, they tend to crave salt, and the salt's not causing the high blood pressure. It's just the having high blood pressure goes along with salt craving. And I'll tell you why, because it dawned on me, like, I don't know, I think I was reading about a nurse poisoning someone with antifreeze, and it tastes sweet. And that's because it's sugar. It's ethylene glycol, and you put it in your radiator in the winter to keep it from freezing. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's the sugar in the blood. If we're dealing with a hibernation syndrome, it might be a good idea, evolution would think, is if you had high levels of sugar in your blood in case you're going to have to sleep overnight and your body temperature goes down below freezing, then the sugar in your blood would prevent your blood from crystallizing. And that's what causes most freezing damage, is the liquids turn into crystals and they poke through all your membranes and stuff. And then so I thought, wow, so maybe diabetes, and since it's so widespread, it's nature's way of getting you ready to survive freezing to death. And then I thought, well, what about this high blood pressure? Does that lower the freezing point of your blood? And I did find a little physics thing that shows the water freezes at a lower temperature if it's under higher pressure. And I originally thought that was correct idea, but some German high school kid said, "You're full of it." It does lower the freezing point of water, but almost by like a minuscule amount. And I looked it up, and yes, he was correct. a high school student in Germany corrected me. But then I started thinking, well, it's got to lower the freezing point of your blood somehow. And then I used to put plastic bottles with Coke in the freezer, and just into the point where they're about to start freezing. And then I take them out, and then when you unscrew the top and all the air comes out, or the CO2 comes out, all of a sudden it turns into a slush. It turns into instant freeze. So apparently having high levels of a gas in your blood will also lower your freezing point of your blood. And so I finally figured out the high blood pressure forces more gases into your blood, and that also significantly reduces the freezing point. And so basically that's the subset to the human hibernation syndrome. I call it the human antifreeze syndrome. So that a lot of people on the internet thought that was kind of an interesting insight, that diabetes could actually be good for you if you're caught out in the snow for too long.
That's interesting. That's interesting, yeah.
So basically then I published that book, and after about 6 months, a lot of people started reading it. And then before you know it, I'm getting an avalanche of emails and responses from people that were trying their own high-dose D3 experiments. And I've got some just amazing stories of all the things it's cured. The first one I got was from a very large woman named Janelle, and African-American. She had a thing called a prolapsing bladder. Do you want to know what that is?
I already know what it is. It sounds awful.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of, but it's like the bladder starts taking off on its own.
Yeah, like falling out. So.
Like running around on the floor, and then get back in there. So she, so she went to the doctor, and then they originally gave her some surgery. They put in that thing, a sling. It's called a mesh sling. There's a lot of lawsuits because they have problems with it. They advertise on TV. But the sling didn't work, so they had to take it out. And then she had this wound in there that wouldn't heal, and she had to go to the chronic wound scraping center once a week. That just sounds awful. So then they tried it again like a year later. That didn't take. And then she tells me, so they made one out of her own skin like another year later. All this time, she's almost on death's door, getting this wound scraping going on. It sounds like hell. And then she read my book when it was titled Against Doctor's Orders for 99 cents at the time. And so she read about it, and she started taking 80,000 units of vitamin D3 per day. And she said after 3 years of a chronic wound, within 2 weeks, one of her chronic wounds completely healed. And then within like 4 weeks, the other one completely healed. And then she had all these other issues, like her kneecap was like on the side of her leg. That actually moved back into place. And she had all these issues, and she's like, oh, I finally feel human again. So that was a pretty amazing one. But I was going to get even more amazing ones to come. One of my favorite ones is a lady from Austria emailed me. She was taking high-dose D3 to treat her endometriosis. And I guess her husband, in sympathy with her, decided she was taking 40,000 a day. And then her husband, she wrote to me, was taking 60,000 a day just in sympathy with her. He didn't think he could cure anything of his own. But she failed to mention when I was first emailing her that, oh, by the way, my husband's been blind in his one eye for like two years now, and the doctors say it's permanent. From some kind of sinus infection that damaged like the optic nerve. So she emails me again like 2 or 3 months later. She goes, this is an amazing story. My husband's been blind in one eye for 2 years. The doctor said it was permanent. He's been taking D3 for about 2 months now. And he woke up just the other day and said, you're not going to believe it. I'm looking at you through my blind eye. Damn. And the doctor said it was impossible after he went back in, but at that point he'd regained 40% of his vision, and it was still gaining more vision as the last time I talked to her. So that was D3 is creating miracles like Jesus.
Welcome back to the longest podcast in the world. I'm just fucking around. Okay, so Jeff, let's. You told me this story already, but I want to hear for like the audience and everyone in the world listening to this right now. I want to. So, how did you come up with D3? And you are not necessarily came up with it. How did you realize large doses of vitamin D3 cured all these things?
Well, basically, it all started with my intense desire to research the causes and cure of aging and aging-related diseases. So it's kind of a long story, kind of a odd story, but basically
start in Thailand.
Yeah, well, I used to in my 20s. I was doing really well in real estate. By the age 29, I could almost retire if I wanted, and I started visiting Thailand, and because I'd heard about how fun Thailand was, and so when I got there, I started doing. I couldn't believe it was for a young man. It's like he died and gone to heaven, and it's like you were a king, like because you had, if you had a little money, it was a lot of money over there, and there were just great looking girls everywhere, and you just when you're a young man, you do what young men do in Thailand. And that was back in the late 80s. My father had been scaring me. He's a doctor with, he'd been worried that, you're a little too fast and furious with the ladies. You might be at risk of getting AIDS. He used to always worry me about that. And then, but it still was kind of a mystery back then. And so, basically, so I was in Thailand several times and probably did things not smart. And then, so I'm flying back home, and I'm, and then before I went to Thailand, this is a part I didn't tell you about. When I was younger, I got this like patch of baldness that goes down in this shape of a sword. It's called scleroderma. It translates to sword skin. So I always had a little bald sword mark on my head when I was young and growing up. It's not dangerous. It's called scleroderma morphea. And then my dad's got a friend who was a plastic surgeon who would always he'd have me come in and cut little slices out of it and sew my scalp together to get rid of it. And then he did one last procedure on me before I went to Thailand, and the scar was pretty much gone. And but then my dad had told my sister in secret. He said, if anything ever happens to me, make sure Jeff gets an AIDS test. And of course, a girl can't keep a secret. So she told my mother, and then somehow it got back to me that the guy who had done that surgery on my head, he went in a month later to my dad and said, could you give me a private AIDS test? Because my hand is like numb. And he didn't want it on his record if he was positive. And my dad gave him the test. And he was AIDS positive. And he died like within a month of like a AIDS-related brain tumor.
Fuck.
And he's the guy who'd been doing the surgery on my head. And my dad knows that doctors always stick themselves. So he thought maybe I could have gotten AIDS that way. So I kind of knew about this before I went to Thailand. And it didn't help when he kept saying ouch when he was operating on me. But no, that didn't happen. So I off to Thailand with this thought in the back of my head. And then, so there I am having fun. And I'm on the plane home. I'm stopped through an airport in Indonesia. And I pick up a book called The Coming Heterosexual AIDS Crisis by Masters and Johnson, the sex researchers from St. Louis. And they made the case that this AIDS is going to explode throughout the heterosexual community. So, and then it starts talking about the initial symptoms of AIDS. So I'm reading it on the plane. It's like the first one is, it takes usually like 6 weeks to kick in. And the symptoms are, first it's like flu-like symptoms. And so I'm reading it, and then, I feel like I've got the flu. So then Then I read the next one. It says, oh, and you get swollen lymph glands like the mumps. So I start feeling my neck. And holy shit. Those things are like expanding like crazy. And then what else? You get a fever. So I'm getting a fever. Every symptom I read, all of a sudden, I didn't notice it before I read the book, but as I'm reading the book, I go, whoa, I've got these symptoms. And so by the time I get back to Chicago, I'm like, oh man, I'm probably infected, I'm pretty sure. But, well, there's a good chance. So I've been dating this nurse who worked at a hospital where they just got the brand new AIDS test that will determine if you have been infected like immediately right after. Because the older tests would take 6 weeks before, you need to be infected 6 weeks before they could tell. So this new one, the polymerase chain reaction, can find out immediately. So she took my blood and we sent that test in. And then the doctor said, well, it's going to be ready in a week. And so we waited a week and then a weekend. And then we called like middle of the week, Wednesday. And the doctor said, oh, the results aren't conclusive yet. And then so we called back on Friday. And then the doctor said, no, the test is still inconclusive. And I was like, da, 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 da. Oh my God. I had the whole weekend thinking, I've got AIDS for sure. There's no doubt about it. They must be retesting it. Why is it taking so long? So I spent the entire weekend like, sure, I was going to die within like 5 years or however long it takes back then. And so I rethought my entire life. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing wasting all this time making money in real estate? I'm just going to die someday anyway. What's the point? And so at that point, I'd made the decision. I'm going to go to school, back to school, and try to figure out how to find a cure for aging and age-related diseases. And so I basically went back to school to get my biochem degree. And I would take one class at a time. I always set the curve at University of Illinois in Circle. And then so I learned biochem and biology and chemistry like better than almost anyone. I was setting the curve, and all the med students didn't like me because I made it hard for them to get an A. And then by the time I was about to get my biochem degree, I had to learn all these stupid energy cycles and just rote memorization. I said, that's it. I quit, and I just spent the next 10 years of like 7 days a week, 12 hours a day in the Northwestern School Library studying aging-related articles and stuff. And then I finally had this eureka moment, and I figured it out when I was comparing these rapid aging diseases of progeria. That's kids that age really fast. They become like old men by the age 10. And then compared to an aging disease that kicks in at puberty called Werner's syndrome. I compared those two, and I had my eureka moment. And so I wrote this really long, 70-page long paper about the unified theory of aging. And I submitted it to like Nature, got rejected, to Lancet, rejected, Science, rejected. But it finally got accepted by Medical Hypotheses, which they had 5 Nobel Prize winners on their editorial board, and they knew I had no degree. But they said they accepted it for accelerated publication because they said it was extremely exciting and of major importance, and it was 7 times longer than their limit. But that was my first paper published in '98.
So that seems like your style.
Go on.
That seems like your style.
Yeah. So, like, I get a lot of ribbing from some people on the internet. You're not even a doctor. I said, well, there's a little more to the story than that. Doctors take my advice quite often. But so that's basically, I just become a research junkie at that point. I come from a long line of doctors. There's like my grandfather, my uncle, my dad, and my other uncle. They're all like Stanford MDs, so it's kind of in my genes. So I've just, so I have a knack for researching. And then I stumbled across this vitamin D3. Just when I bumped it up to 25,000, it triggered a whole new research obsession of mine. And I've been doing it God, for the last 7 years, and I think I've pretty much figured out what causes and basically how to cure almost every human disease except for